Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It is my great pleasure to be moderating this first panel of today's forum, which takes us straight into a critical binary, which is geopolitics and climate action. In this rapidly shifting world, geopolitics and climate have become increasingly intertwined. We have seen that geopolitical ruptures are affecting the way we both conduct climate cooperation and also drive climate action multilaterally. And it has also affected the way that the dynamics on the ground have shaped up to enable us to deliver climate action in the real world. Yet at the same time, rarely has the global geopolitical imperative to achieve climate transition been as strong. And I think we can all agree that we have felt that very strongly in the current context of the energy crisis. So what all of this means is that we are navigating a new reality in which cooperation and collaboration has not slowed, but has been adapted, is adapting, and it has been reimagined by political leaders, by diplomats, by others who are looking and finding opportunities for pragmatic solutions and ways that we can advance the transition amid the multiple challenges we are currently facing. And these are many, and we have heard already about some of them this morning. So I am truly delighted to be joined by our eminent panelists for this discussion, who are all current and former government leaders, national ministers, high-level officials, and who have dedicated their careers to driving climate cooperation globally, regionally, and nationally. And I am very happy to introduce them, starting on my right, His Excellency Surangel Jr., who is the President of the Republic of Palau, one of the world's most climate-vulnerable countries and one with a very rich natural ecosystem. President, your country is also currently chairing the negotiating bloc of the Alliance of Small Island States within the climate negotiations, really driving the efforts to keep warming to 1.5 degrees. We have next to the President, Dr. Dino Patti Djalal, who's former Indonesian Vice Minister for Foreign Affairs and the founder and chairman of the Foreign Policy Community of Indonesia, which is a foreign policy network of 100,000 experts, the biggest in the Indo-Pacific region. Welcome. Next to Dr. Djalal, we have Ms. Toni, who is the CEO of COP30 and who led the first climate conference after the US withdrawal from the Paris Agreement last year, with all of that implied. Ms. Toni has served as Brazil's National Secretary for Climate Change and is the founder and executive director of the Climate and Society Institute in Brazil. And last but not least, we have His Excellency Hassan Mohamed Moalin, State Minister of Industry of Ethiopia, which is the host of next year's COP32. And with 30 years of experience in national politics, Minister Hassan is also a member of the House of People's Representatives and has previously also served as State Minister of Trade and Regional Integration. So a very warm welcome to you all. We have a limited amount of time to tackle what is a very big question. So without further ado, I'd like to invite you, President Whips, to start us off with your reflections. How are you seeing geopolitics and climate interact in a fragmented world?
Testing. Thank you, moderator, and I want to thank E3G for framing this critical discussion. You know, there was a once famous leader that walked these streets, Sir Winston Churchill, and he said, "One should never let a good crisis go to waste." Lately, the world has been gripped by what many are calling an energy crisis. But let us be entirely accurate. This is not an energy crisis. It is a fossil fuel crisis. The recent hostilities and the closure of the Strait of Hormuz have laid bare a fundamental flaw in our global architecture. The trouble is that even nations making heroic leaps in the energy transition, like Pakistan, with its incredible solar revolution, remain dangerously tethered to the volatility of oil and gas to run everyday life. In the wide expanses of the great blue Pacific, we don't just read about supply chain shocks, we bleed them. Small island developing states typically spend 10% of their GDP on importing fossil fuels. In Palau, it's 13%. And in Tuvalu, it's 20%. When oil prices spike, we have zero diplomatic levers to pull and no raw power to influence global supply chains. We're just the recipients. The recent choke point disruptions force us to trigger our own regional emergency response mechanism under what we call the Baitakawa Declaration. In the Marshall Islands, recently declared a national emergency, and others have implemented strict fuel rationing. Across our islands, citizens drew a collective inward gasp as we were recalling the acute vulnerability we felt during the height of COVID-19. The crisis is not a reason to take a backward step. It is the ultimate reason to double down. The worst thing any nation can do right now is to dig deeper into fossil fuels. We must leave them in the ground and embrace the superior, cheaper, and entirely dependable technology that sun, wind, and storage provide. Every dollar invested in renewables today is a dollar invested in ensuring that a geopolitical shockwave can never paralyze our economies again. Last month in Port Moresby, Pacific energy ministers declared a shared vision to achieve 100% renewable energy future for the Blue Pacific. We intend to be the first region in the world to get there. Embracing this future is a national security imperative, a shield against external shocks, and a driver for development. These words apply equally, I think, just to about every region represented on this panel today. We need more than global goals. We need demonstrable, practical solutions. And I deeply welcome the leadership of my fellow panelists, Toni, and Brazil's vital work in stewarding the roadmap to a transition away from fossil fuels alongside the Santa Marta process. On the demand side, the Electrify Now initiative, launching here this afternoon, is undoubtedly a major step in the right direction. But to turn roadmaps into reality, we must fund the pipeline. When Palau hosts the Pacific Island Forum Leaders meeting in September, we will launch the Pacific Renewable Energy Investment Prospectus to provide clear visibility on leading investment-ready projects to our global partners. We are living in turbulent times. The temptation to retreat into isolation is great, but we reject it unequivocally. The answer to fragmentation is not to cooperate less, but it is to cooperate better and more effectively. In a fossil fuel era, geopolitics have always wagged the tail of the climate dog. The unstoppable renewables transition allows us to flip that script. It allows nations large and small to harness true energy sovereignty and break free from the crippling reliance on others. Working closer together, we can move toward true energy security, self-sufficiency, and a safer climate for all. Sula, thank you.
Thank you very much, President Whips, for sharing with us the critical nature of moving both from and navigating a context of crisis into going to cooperation to implementation, and also sharing Palau's leadership regionally and internationally to drive these efforts. I think the message is clear. It is about cooperation and how we find the path forward for that and for implementation in this increasingly fractured context. So with that, let me turn to Ms. Toni. COP30 saw the launch of the Global Implementation Accelerator, among many other outcomes, some of them already referenced by President Whips. And this is a mechanism to facilitate cooperation on real-world delivery for climate action. Can you share with us, as we reflect on the space for doing such cooperation and implementation on the ground, what lessons and challenges have you already observed among those who are translating climate commitments into real-world action on the ground? And if I may, are there any lessons from your own successful leadership of COP30 that you can share with us on how to drive unity in a time of complex engagements between different actors?
Thank you very much. What a pleasure to be here. I want to start congratulating E3G and the London Climate Week, because this is like real geopolitics. We are all here moving, and this is really impressed that you have doubled the size of the London Climate Week, so it's a real pleasure to be here, especially in the panel with Ethiopia, Indonesia, and especially Palau, representing the small islands. And I wanted to thank you, Ms. President, in the name of I think all of us, for the leadership of the small islands in maintaining the topic and science and 1.5 throughout, and for all the support you gave us at COP30. So thank you very, very much. And it's quite interesting that we are here. And I obviously couldn't start this without remind us that this is hotter than Belém. So London is now hotter than Belém. I thought it would be difficult, but the air conditioning is working better than we managed there. But it's really hot. But I mean, we are in a transition of the geopolitics. Just by this panel having countries from the south sitting here to say our perspective from the geopolitics, I think we already heard how we can make of this crisis an opportunity to really put what is happening in our countries. And what is happening in our countries is that we have incorporated climate into our development path. There is no doubt. We know that we have to develop with now the constraints, because we wanted to be sustainable growth. So there is no doubt. There is no lack of ambition from our side, and I think many of our NDCs have shown that. But yet, the word is the ecosystem of implementation is not there. So we have now some instruments within the UNFCCC, and we are hoping that they will get even stronger. Yes, we propose the accelerator that will choose very small number of topics to push for positive tipping points. We have the mission, Belém Mission 1.5. We have the action agenda now that has agreed on a 5-year plan to bring together and give continuity for private sector, civil society, subnational governments to work on the same topics for at least 5 years, linked to the GST1. So we have the climate weeks, and we have many instruments within the UNFCCC. But we need to look at the instruments we have that are outside of the UNFCCC that needs to be aligned to the goals of the Paris Agreement. Multilateral development banks is an obvious one. We need to do that reform, and it needs to be quicker, the reform. We obviously doing the roadmap of 1.3 trillion to show that that mobilization of resources needs to come to developing countries, as I said, to support a development path that is aligned to 1.5. But I wanted to now finalize talking about the roadmap. In Belém was quite tension. There was a lot of tension about, yes, are we going to have the roadmaps in the negotiation, yes or no? I think for anybody that understands negotiation knew that that would be almost impossible. But what we really intended as COP30 is that to make the discussion about transitioning away from fossil fuel not a taboo. We have already agreed on transitioning away from fossil fuel in COP28. So it's no longer a question of if, it's a question of how. And as we heard the Secretary General today, is going to happen. Should we plan for that? We need roadmaps. We needed to talk about, to look on how dependent we are from fossil fuel, not only because of energy, but for finance, for the demands of our industries, our transportation. So the roadmap that COP30 is going to be delivering at the end of the year looks at the how, what needs to be done in terms of economic issues, nationally and internationally, on demand, nationally and internationally, and obviously about production of the countries. We are very close to the Santa Marta process. This afternoon, we are going to have a meeting between the Santa Marta and COP30 presidency to show that we are together. But I think the most important is looking at GST2, what we needed to do in that small paragraph at the moment, paragraph 28. We probably will need pages of how to go forward in terms of delivering what was already agreed, which is transitioning away from fossil fuel. So count with COP30 to continue this debate, obviously together with Ethiopia, Turkey, and Australia. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anna, Toni. You've raised the important question of coalitions of the willing, of really looking at momentum where there is momentum. And I think it's more widespread than we sometimes realize in some of the conversations and some of the rhetoric, the narratives, as the previous speaker was talking about. And I think it's quite critical to understand that there is now this opportunity to take a whole of economy approach, really start implementing the roadmaps that you were talking about, understand that we have the tools and opportunities to mitigate the disruptions that are in the external environment. And on this point, I'd like to bring you in, Dr. Djalal, on the question of this other side of the geopolitical complexity that we face, which is the high vulnerability of green supply chains, of technology, to disruptions relating to the external geopolitical environment. Indonesia is a country with rich critical raw materials necessary for the transition, and it's also in the region of Asia, which in many ways is setting the pace for the energy transition. So could you share with us how, as Indonesia, and also how you see middle powers navigating and taking approaches to developing partnerships that also allow them to preserve strategic autonomy?
Well, thank you very much, E3G, for convening this panel. I want to raise one big picture that we need to be mindful of, and that is the fact that, in my view, climate change is being pushed to the margins now of world affairs. And this is mainly due to, one, the fact that geopolitics is king. You know, in Paris Treaty 2015, climate change was king, right? But since then, geopolitical insecurity has dominated the attention of a number of world leaders, and as a result, resources that could be used for climate change and SDG is being depleted, right? And that is a structural challenge for us. And the geopolitical insecurity and competition is seen as more urgent, a lot more urgency than climate and SDG. And I think that's a fundamental challenge for world politics. And the other reason is that for a number of countries in the global south, maybe in the global north as well, but including in Indonesia, climate change does not sell in elections, right? We've done a lot to convince politicians, put climate change in your political promise, and many of them say, no, it doesn't get us votes. So we gotta get through that problem honestly, yeah. And the hope lies in what you say, the middle powers, because with the US retreating, China is rising, obviously, but the real shaper, a significant shaper of world affairs now lie in the 20 or so middle powers in the global south and in the north that have the economic, technological, diplomatic, and political capacity to shape the next world order, including on climate change. Most of the middle powers in the north and the south have net zero targets, and they account among the G20 countries about 35% of global emissions. And even they are now hosting the next COP31, Australia, Turkey, and Australia. So they have much greater capacity to shape the climate diplomacy. Indonesia is among these countries. We wanted to create a more green supply chain and technology. As you said, we have established what was called JETP, which is a $20 billion package to clean our energy supply, take out coal. But the US pulled out, and now it's in limbo. So the question is now how do we re-energize the renewables? The 100 gigawatt renewable now will rely mostly on China, because China has the finance and the technology, especially on solar, but we don't want to be dependent on China, right? We want to look more on other countries, Japan and Korea and others. But what you said about strategic autonomy is true, but we see it more as strategic versatility, because we don't want to be tied to anybody, and the fact that we have autonomy means we can be transactional and look into all kinds of directions to achieve our climate goals.
Thank you, Dr. Djalal. I think that's one we'll remember, strategic versatility, and that actually brings me nicely to you, Minister Hassan. We just heard about the dependencies, but also the complexities of trying to diversify, working with like-minded partners, especially among middle powers. For a rapidly developing economy like Ethiopia, how are you navigating the protection of your domestic industry and its agenda and its transition from these external disruptions? And if I may, with an eye to the COP32 next year, is green industrialization likely to be a priority? What can you share with us?
Thank you. Thank you, Moderator. Distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, good morning to you all. It is a great pleasure and honor to participate in this important discussion on industrial transformation, resource sovereignty, and the evolving relationship between geopolitics and climate action. We meet at a time when the global economy is undergoing profound transformation. The transition to a low-carbon future is reshaping trade, investment, industrial production, and technological development. At the same time, geopolitical tensions, supply chain disruption, and increasing competition over the strategic resource are creating new challenges and uncertainties across the world. For developing countries in Africa, these changes present both significant opportunities and complex challenges. The growing demand for critical minerals, clean energy, technologies, and sustainable industrial production offers tremendous potential for economic growth and industrial development. However, it also raises important questions regarding source security, technology access, industrial competitiveness, and equitable participation in global value chains. For Ethiopia, our objective is clear. We seek not merely to participate in global chain, but to ensure that industrialization drives structural transformation, creates quality jobs, strengthening technological capabilities, and improves the livelihoods of our people. To achieve this vision, Ethiopia is pursuing several strategic priorities. First, we are strengthening and diversifying our international partnership in an increasingly fragmented global environment. Resource resilience requires broad-based and mutually beneficial cooperation that promotes investment, technology transfer, and industrial collaboration. Second, we are committed moving up to value chains. Developing countries should not remain suppliers of raw materials while importing high-value manufactured products. Local value addition, import substitution, and industrial upgrading are essential for creating jobs, retaining economic value, and enhancing competitiveness. Third, through our 10 years prospective development plan, homegrown economic reform agenda, and Made in Ethiopia movement are expanding domestic manufacturing and strengthening strategic sectors, including renewable energy, agro-processing, pharmaceuticals, digital technologies, and sustainable manufacturing. Fourth, we recognize that regional integration is indispensable. The African continent's free trade area provides a historic opportunity to expand markets, strengthen regional supply chains, attract investment, and build more resilient industrial ecosystem across Africa. At the same time, climate action remains central to our development agenda. Ethiopia views green industrialization not as a constraint on a growth, but as a pathway to sustainable and inclusive development. Our investments in renewable energy, including hydropower, wind, geothermal sources, e-mobility, and the green legacy initiatives are helping to build one of the cleanest energy systems in Africa, creating a strong foundation for a low-carbon industrial growth. As we look to the future, Ethiopia is honored to prepare to host COP32 after Turkey. Ethiopia looks forward to working closely with their partners to advance ambitious and practical solutions that support both climate action, sustainable development. COP32 should serve as a platform for meaningful dialogue to strengthen climate finance, technology transfer, and the capacity building efforts that enables development countries to accelerate this green industrialization transition. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, no country achieves this objective alone. International cooperation remains essential. The global transition must be fair, inclusive, and supportive for local value addition. It should not replicate historical patterns where resources are extracted from developing countries, while higher value manufacturing and technological benefits remains concentrated elsewhere. In conclusion, the future belongs to countries that can successfully connect industrial development, climate action, technological innovation, and regional cooperation, which is very important. Ethiopia's vision is not simply one of the resource ownership, but for productive sovereignty, the ability to transform resource, technology, and the human talent into sustainable growth and shared prosperity. By strengthening partnership, advancing green industrialization, promoting regional integration, and investing in our people, we believe that developing countries can transform today's challenges into tomorrow's opportunity. I thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Minister, and also for giving us some thoughts on what COP32 next year may be shaped around. And with that on an eye to the future, we are at the end of this panel discussion, and I think we have heard that climate competes with geopolitics at times in the framing, in the resourcing, but the solution to geopolitical disruption is also through climate, and I think we've heard that very strongly along with the clear message not to stop cooperation, but to reinvent it, to find the spaces where it can exist and become stronger. So please join me in warmly thanking our panelists.